Good evening and welcome to Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I'm Ryan Roberts and these are my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith and Miss Shelley Pruitt. How y'all doing tonight?
Doing good. I'm glad that you actually called us out like that so they know who is who, Mr. and Mrs. Appreciate that. Miss. Why am I so close to the screen tonight?
I don't know.
I'm like,
hey guys. I can see the pores in your face.
No shit. No,
not really. Yeah, I made the mistake of calling Shelley Mrs. too many times, so, I had to get that right.
No ring. On purpose, people. On purpose. Once I took that chain off, I'm not ever putting it back on.
This is a great way to start off the podcast. Good job.
I know. We are about to get our mob geek on. You know me and my gangsters. I love me some gangsters. And I'm excited because I don't know a whole lot about our guy tonight. I know the name and I know some of the stories, but I don't know a whole lot about him. So I get to get a little mob educated tonight.
And so tonight, go ahead, Blake.
I was just going to say, I'm in the same boat as you. I think I literally just told you right before we came on. It was like, out of all the outlaws that we could cover and have covered, this is the one that I know probably the least about, which is crazy. It's like I know his name, I know his story, but
yeah, because you guys know my guys are Gotti, Giancana, Capone, Luciano. You bring on those good-looking Italian men, absolutely. Sorry, we're talking about mobsters. Okay, it's not your mobsters.
Sorry, Shelley's inbox, R.I.P. Like it's just going to be flooded now.
She's got to type, guys. We're just saying.
But that's why I chose this particular person we're talking about tonight, because he's someone that you do hear about mentioned amongst those names. You hear him mentioned amongst like John Dillinger and Babyface Nelson and Bonnie and Clyde and things like that, because he was around the same time, but you don't really hear his story a whole lot. Mm-hmm. So tonight we're going to delve deep into the story of Pretty Boy Floyd. And, he is a very interesting gangster. And I think you don't really hear a whole lot about him because, Dillinger was such a looming figure at the time. And Pretty Boy Floyd was too. And their stories are kind of similar. They were both like nice, clean cut Midwestern boys who kind of turned bad and went down the wrong path. And we're going to kind of find out what happened with Floyd here in just a sec. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right into this because this is going to be a nice, big, juicy one for everybody. So
I love a
juicy one. Go for it.
Love a juicy one. Let's do it.
So Charles Pretty Boy Floyd was born in the North Georgia mountains of Bartow County on February the 3rd, 1904. He was born to farmer Walter Lee Floyd and his wife, Mamie Eccles. Now, Charlie was the fourth child born to the God-fearing couple. Walter Lee Floyd was known as a good man. He was friendly, hardworking, and always willing to help anyone. But he was also a strict father and expected his children to mind what he said. And Mamie was a very religious woman. She was also a very stern parent, but they were good parents and they loved their children very much. And a few years after Charles was born, the Floyd family packed up and moved out west to Oklahoma. Georgia wasn't really working out for them. And there was a lot more better opportunity out there in the Sooner State. So they moved out west and settled in the little community of Aikens, Oklahoma.
Okay, wait, question real quick.
Yes.
I totally missed it at the beginning because Shelley was making me laugh. I blame it on her.
Not.
Yeah, you were. Shut up. Where was he born again?
He was born in the North Georgia mountains in Bartow County. There wasn't really a town that was given. Okay. It's just in Bartow County in Georgia.
It threw me because you said Mamie Eccles was his mother.
Mm-hmm.
I have a Mamie and an Eccles on my family, and they're about from that region. So I'm like,
you might want to do some ancestry digging.
I might need to do some ancestry digging. Am I related to Pretty Boy Floyd?
You just might be.
Go on with your fabulous story.
All right. So the Floyd family began to farm their new plot out there in Aikens. And Charlie, as he was growing up, he helped his family harvest their crops and helped them pick all the cotton and shuck all the corn and stuff of that nature. But most of all, he hated picking cotton. He'd rather eat broken glass. But since he was a good kid and since he was a good kid and he would do as he was told, words are hard, he listened to his parents and attended church on Sundays and picked the cotton and did whatever they asked him to do. He even got all of his chores done and was just an all-around good-natured kid. But while Charlie was growing up harvesting all the crops in Aikens, he knew from a very young age he did not want to be a farmer. And he damn sure didn't want to pick cotton. there had to be something more out there for him. So Charlie found his escape in the exploits of others. You see, Aikens was close to the Cookson Hills, and those hills were known to be hideouts for many infamous gangsters and outlaws throughout history. Charlie, growing up hearing stories about the Dalton Gang and Cherokee Bill and Bell Star and their local exploits and all their hideouts out there in the Cookson Hills. But he idolized one most of all. His idol was Jesse James. And, what a hell of an idol to have. Now, these larger-than-life personas captured his young imagination, and he would often daydream about being just like them. He didn't want to be on the farm. He just longed to be legendary and free. And while Charlie was a good-natured kid from good stock, he still had his struggles with right and wrong. He, attended church on Sundays and attended Bible lessons and had a strict upbringing and had right and wrong drilled into his head. But when he was 10, he'd listen to the little devil that sat on his shoulder for the first time and commit his first crime. Now, a local man named J.H. Harkrider owned a grocery store near Charles's home in Sallisaw, Oklahoma. Harkrider had several boxes of cookies for sale in his store, but he noticed a few kept disappearing. So he marked a few boxes in case they went missing so he could see where they went. That afternoon, he noticed a young Charlie Floyd hanging out in the store.
This Charlie sounds like my kind of crime. Just FYI. Cookies are involved. Come on, of course.
So Charlie walked around the store that afternoon and kind of stood around for a bit, but then he abruptly left. And Mr. Harkrider noticed that one of the boxes of cookies were missing. So Mr. Harkrider suspected that Charlie had taken them, and he went and grabbed a local police officer and went into an alley beside the store. And in the alley, they found Charles Floyd munching on a box of cookies. And thus began the criminal career of Pretty Boy Floyd. This modern infraction would be the first of many that would become one of the most notorious outlaws but words are fucking hard tonight, guys.
That man had a choice in that moment. That man had a choice. This was a little kid who just wanted some cookies, who didn't have any spending money. And he could have just gone to him, got him and said, hey, listen, if you want a couple of cookies, you come talk to me. Don't just take, you ask me. And I'll get you, we'll put a box down here and we can share. Just ask me. He didn't have to go get the law over a damn box of cookies.
Well, no, but they were one of the poorer families in town, and they were sharecroppers, and they just kind of want to make an example out of him. So
I'm like, well, see, I'm just imagining myself like the police officer walking around, the corner in the alley, and my ass is just over there like,
yeah,
just like.
And see, here's the difference. I'd have run off way past that alley.
Shit.
Yeah, I would have gone farther than the alley.
Oh, he was hungry. He had to stop. He had to stop and get him something to eat.
And again, that man had so many ways he could have gone with that. And I'm surprised his name ain't Cookie Monster Floyd.
No, but that was his first crime, and that would be the first of many. But his other crimes were kind of a little ways off. He kind of lays low there for a little bit after this first crime. Now, after the cookie incident, Charlie kept his nose clean for a while.
I bet old Mamie whomped him good.
Oh, I'm sure she did. I'm sure his dad beat the tar out of him too. So he kept his nose clean. So he was known as, after the while. Guys, sorry, I don't know why words are so hard for me today.
Rewind.
It's been all day long.
Hit it again.
After the cookie incident, Charlie kept his nose clean for a while, and he was known at school as a good-natured and good-hearted boy, and he was a jovial boy and a bit of a prankster. He liked to laugh and have a good time, but all that seemed to change when he turned 14. Being bored with school and wanting a few dollars in his pocket, Charlie left and became a harvest hand during harvest time, and he traveled all over Oklahoma and Kansas, cutting grain, shucking corn, and picking cotton that he hated so much. He made a few bucks and returned to Aikens at the end of the harvest, and when he returned, his mother and sister noticed a change in the young Charles Floyd. The once jovial schoolboy had returned with a muscular build and a penchant for fighting, and while he was gone, he had hooked up with the wrong crowd. And with a little bit of money that Charlie had made while he was out of town and upon his return to Aikens, he decided he would start hanging out at the local pool hall there in Sallisaw, which fit his new MO. It was a place that the pious and more family-oriented stayed away from. It was a rough and tumble establishment popular with field hands and oil workers. And this was where the action was happening and where Charles wanted to be. But hanging out there didn't come without its problems for the budding young man. He often found himself at the end of several bad situations and numerous fights. But finding he was really good with his hands and had a punch, quote, like a kick from a mule, Charlie mostly walked away from these fights unscathed and the victor. Until one day he did. He boldly picked a fight with several field hands inside the bar, but he didn't expect what happened next. The farmhands pounced on top of him and beat him within an inch of his life. They punched and kicked him while one of them desperately tried to gouge out one of his eyes. And when they finished, Charlie was taken to a nearby hospital where he immediately had an operation to save his eye. And luckily they were able to save it, and Charles recuperated for a while. And after that, he kind of calmed it down and laid low for a few years. Now, while he was on the farm, he began passing the time working with the family and hunting in the nearby Cookson Hills, and he took the money he made from all of his farming and began buying nice clothes. And to go with his new clothes, he began wearing his hair in a carefully crafted pompadour. The neighbors said it was slick as axle grease, and many of them jokingly began calling him Pretty Boy, a moniker that would become infamous years later. And with his new duds and his new hairstyle, Floyd would attend parties and dances in the area and dance the night away. But even his newfound sense of style and extracurricular activities couldn't keep him out of trouble. In May of 1922, at the age of 17, Charles Floyd would commit his first felony. He and another local boy named Harold Franks broke into the Aikens post office and stole $350 worth of coins. Now, this wasn't just some petty theft. This was federal and carried a whole lot of weight. Investigators from Muskogee came down immediately to investigate the crime. Fearing they would get caught, they gathered all of their loot and walked it to an old well on Charles Floyd's grandfather's property. The boys dumped their ill-gotten gains and hoped no one would find it. But the federal investigators found the coins and immediately suspected Charles Floyd. And on June the 4th, 1923, the investigators tracked down Floyd and Franks.
We're talking $300 and something dollars, essentially, in coins. And in 1923.
Yeah, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I just have to say, I could be a pretty boy too. I mean,
keep telling yourself that.
Fuck off, right?
So they were arrested, and Franks confessed immediately to what happened. He told the agents that Floyd was his partner in the heist, but Floyd maintained his innocence. Floyd's father even vouched for his son, saying he was at home the night of the robbery and was fast asleep in bed. But lucky for Charlie, he would never see the inside of a cell for this crime. Friends of the Floyd family paid his bond, which was $1,000, and in March of 1924, Charlie was acquitted, when the postmaster and the post inspector just no-showed the trial. So he was incredibly lucky.
Wait, his bond was $1,000?
His bond was $1,000. And luckily,
got paid. And
it
that
got paid.
Have been through a bail bondsman. They had to raise $1,000.
Mm-hmm. Friends of the Floyd family did it.
Do you know what the equivalent of that is about?
I don't know. There's no telling.
I mean,
if you want to do the calculations, because that's a lot.
And that was in
today.
what year? What year was that?
That was in 1924.
Oh, okay.
1924 for $1,000 in today's money. Jesus, that is $17,650.
Good Lord.
God almighty.
Even though you said that they lived off the land, they were sharecroppers and did that kind of thing, somebody they knew had enough money to pay that.
And it said friends of the Floyd family.
So you're basically looking that he stole about a third of that.
Yep, stole about a third of that.
About 17 grand. He stole about a third of that. So y'all can do the math.
About $5,000.
I failed math. Yeah.
Yeah, so, me and math didn't get along. Me and history are much more.
They always told us you're not going to have a calculator everywhere you go. Bitch, I got a phone now. So what's up?
Bullshit.
You're right. I don't. I have a phone.
Exactly.
But he got real lucky when the postmaster and the postal inspector didn't show up. If they had showed at the trial, he probably would have been in prison then and there. Now, Charlie had just escaped a lengthy prison stint by the skin of his teeth, so he figured he should find a job and get out of Aikens for a while. So he got himself a job in the oil fields. But after a while, he began to hate it. He was covered in grit and grime every day and just wasn't cut out for the back-breaking work in the oil field.
He's pretty boy.
He's pretty boy.
In the oil
exactly. So he knew he wanted the finer things in life, the things a farm boy from Oklahoma could never afford, and he plotted ways to make that more accessible to himself. And he had a restlessness in him that compelled him to do such things, but he would soon meet someone that quelled that restlessness, if only temporarily. One night, Charles met a tall, slender, auburn-haired farm girl with dark eyes named Ruby Hargraves. She instantly became the object of his affection, and the two were attracted to each other like magnets, and they fell head over heels in love, so much so that they were wed June 28th, 1924. In contemplating a future with Ruby, Charles decided to move his new bride back to Aikens where he could be close to his family and try his hand at farming again. And things went well in Aikens for a while. Charlie and Ruby even welcomed their son, Jack Dempsey Floyd, into the world on December the 29th, 1924. And Charles
I'm
loved
guessing Jack Dempsey is named after the boxer Jack Dempsey.
Yeah. The story was he held his son up in the mirror and looked at him and said, "Look, he looks just like Jack Dempsey," and named him Jack Dempsey Floyd.
Okay. I love it.
So Charles loved his new son and was absolutely enamored with him. But now he had another mouth to feed. And he had to do something else. And farming just was not cutting it. So Charles again hit the road and became a traveling field hand for the harvest. And while in the fields, he would meet another restless young street tough that would give him the push he needed to enter a life of crime. That August in 1925, Floyd met Fred the Sheik Hildebrand. They were both harvesting the fields, and they both hated it. Hildebrand was a hood from St. Louis. He had robbed the Kitlark Electric Manufacturing Company a few weeks prior for about $1,822. Hildebrand ran and went into the harvest until the heat died down. He found Charles Floyd and saw a lot of himself in Charles. And he convinced Charlie to leave the fields and help him rob a series of Kroger's in St. Louis. Charlie didn't need much convincing. Here was his chance for a life of adventure and quick cash to boot. So he quickly agreed, and the two threw down their size and they picked up a couple of 6-shooters. Together, they went out and knocked over five different Kroger stores and amassed a total of $525. They had themselves a pretty good little racket going. And after hitting the last Kroger, the two men hopped a train to St. Louis. And once they were there, they met a 26-year-old grocery store owner named James Havarti. They told him of their string of robberies, and Joe Havarti, not James Havarti. They told him of their string of robberies, and Joe was enthralled with their exploits. Havarti was so taken with the two that he offered to rent them rooms above his grocery store. And so Floyd and Hildebrand set up shop right above Havarti's store. And the next day, in a brazen move, Hildebrand actually applied for a job at Kroger's headquarters there in St. Louis.
And this is in what year?
Love that.
This was in 1925.
Okay. I have to back up and pause real quick. So he gets the jail thing happened in 1924, is what you said?
Mm-hmm.
In June.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's married to his now wife,
Ruby,
the same year in 24?
No, so he got
about
married
2
in
months?
24. Hold on. I got to back up. I got to go back in my notes. Hang on.
Sorry.
We were trying to figure out.
I was trying to map.
He was
wasn't mapping.
It was in March of 1924 when he got acquitted, and he was married by June of 1924.
2 months. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought.
Yeah,
I
it
was
was 2 months.
like,
Yeah,
damn.
about 2 months. Then he got married to her.
I was over here like 2 plus carry the 1 and time. Okay.
Now, how interesting that he decided that he was going to rob grocery stores. Perhaps had that grocery store owner just let him have that box of cookies, maybe that would not have been his chosen thing to knock
He
on.
was projecting. And it said somebody says, "Hey, I'm about to rob a grocery store," and he was like, "Fuck this, I'll come with you. Why not?" So,
and then he's like,
Get
"You know
me
what?
some cookies.
No." Then he just said, "I just robbed that son bitch. Now I'm gonna go work for him so I can have all the cookies."
Yeah. So I mean, Hildebrand was, like I said, just to rob 5 Krogers and be like, you know what, I'm gonna go work for the corporate office. Why not?
Hey, I get it. I do the same thing over some Girl Scout cookies, allegedly.
hell yeah.
Just saying.
Allegedly.
Them little freaking suppliers all over the place.
Now, not surprisingly, Hildebrand was rejected. But when he left the corporate headquarters that day, he noticed the payroll truck pulling up as he was leaving.
Oh shit!
And he watched as they took the money to the cashier's room on the 2nd floor. Right then and there, Hildebrand came up with a plan to rob the place. So he went back home and told Floyd and Havarti about his plan. There was so much money to be made that they all agreed to rob the Kroger corporate headquarters. And on Friday, September the 11th, 1925, they put their plan into action. The 3 men left Havarti's store in Havarti's Ford at 11 a.m. They rode around that morning looking for a car to steal. And when they suddenly spotted a Cadillac, inside they saw an African-American chauffeur reading a newspaper. Brandishing sawed-off shotguns and 2 revolvers, the men approached. They ordered the chauffeur to get out of his car and hand over the keys. He handed over the keys, and they stole the car and drove it over to the Kroger's headquarters, arriving about 10 minutes after the bank dropped off the payroll deposit. The 3 men got out of the car and ran up the stairs to the cashier's office. They busted down the door and aimed their guns at the clerks counting the cash. Hildebrand yelled, "Don't scream or we'll have to kill somebody. All we want is the payroll money." Hildebrand grabbed a sack and threw about $11,984 into it. Satisfied with their take, the 3 ran back to their getaway car, and they jumped in and sped away. But Kroger Company driver Louis Vassis saw the bandits fleeing and tailed them. As Havarti jumped out of the Cadillac and got into his Ford, Vassis picked up a policeman and began following Havarti in the Ford down the road. Vassis and the policeman were able to overtake the Ford, but as soon as they did, Floyd and Hildebrand came up on the other side behind them in the Cadillac. With Floyd driving, Hildebrand fired at the cop and the cop fired back, but Vassis and the officer turned their attention to the Cadillac and chased it for a while, so Havarti was able to get away in his Ford. And eventually Floyd was able to lose the cop and the company driver. The trio reconvened at Havarti's store and divided their score. And Floyd couldn't believe it. He was high on the hog. He had finally had a significant sum of money and was a real-life outlaw, just like his hero, Jesse James. The next day, the newspapers came out, and reports from the previous day's robbery were all over the front page. In an interview, the paymaster at Kroger told the press that he was struck by one of the bandits. He said, quote, "One of them was a mere boy, a pretty boy with apple cheeks." This was the first time Floyd was described as a pretty boy in the press, but it most definitely would not be the last. A few days after the robbery, Floyd and Hildebrand bought two brand new Studebakers with the gains from their Kroger heist. And
you never
stupidly,
spend the money immediately.
No.
That's how you get caught.
And by the way, you said like over $11,000, right?
yes,
That's
over
close to
$11,000 is
$11,000.
worth $17,000. So
Well, $11,000 in today's money would be close to $200,000.
That's insane.
That's a lot.
That's a huge
freaking
take.
money.
Mm-hmm. Now, stupidly, they decided to drive back to Floyd's home turf in Salisal. But when Floyd rolled back into town with a new car and money in hand, it began to raise a few eyebrows with the local authorities.
Don't you think?
They knew the Floyd family didn't have that kind of money, and Charles Floyd definitely didn't have that kind of money. So the cops stopped Floyd and Hildebrand and patted them down. And lo and behold, they had money wrappers bearing the seal of the Kroger's bank back in St. Louis on them.
Oh, my God.
The pair were arrested, and Hildebrand sang like a bird. He dropped the dime on Floyd and Havarti instantly. And once Havarti was arrested, he and Hildebrand fingered Floyd for the robberies. Floyd, with no other choice, confessed to his wrongdoing. And Floyd and Havarti both received 5-year sentences, while Hildebrand received an 8-year sentence. So
boy,
on
I
December,
hate rats.
Oh, he ratted them out hardcore. And so on December the 18th, 1925, Floyd entered into a stay of incarceration at the infamous Missouri State Penitentiary.
Ooh. And he is pretty cute. He's a good-looking man.
Shelley just likes her outlaws.
She just likes her outlaws. I mean, he was
He's
good.
a good-looking man.
Hey, I'm just going to say, he was describing me earlier. Nice, apple cheeks and, nice. I'm just saying.
Give you a bow tie and let you go.
Yeah, bow tie and a
Drop you off
six-shooter.
at the Kroger's.
Yeah, I didn't know the fucking Kroger played such an integral part in a 1925 outlaw story. Like, what's that? I don't think I knew Kroger existed back then.
Now, while Floyd was in prison, he mostly kept to himself. He worked a few odd jobs, and other than a few minor scrapes, he got by just fine. He did, however, make good friends with his cellmate, Red Lovett. So much so that Red invited Charlie Floyd to come to Kansas City whenever he got out. And while locked inside, Charlie got his criminal education. He would observe other inmates and ask certain ones about their crimes and their stories, and he took all of it in and learned from the best. He went in a petty thief, but came out a dangerous criminal, much like Clyde Barrow. But after 3.5 years in his iron hell, he was let go for good behavior. However, he didn't have much to celebrate. Ruby had filed for divorce and custody of their child, and Charles knew it was for the best. He wasn't doing right by either one of them, so he signed the papers over and she got custody of Jack Dempsey. So with no wife or son or home to go to, Charlie took Red's advice and he set out for Kansas City. Now, When Floyd entered Kansas City, it was still a rough and tumble town. As far back as the Old West, it was known as a safe haven for outlaws. The cops and judges were on the take from the organized crime that ruled the city, and there was a thriving underworld full of brothels, pool halls, and gambling dens. And this is where Charles Floyd would find refuge after his stint in prison. Charlie looked up his old pal Red, and Red had a place to stay, and Charles moved in with him for a while. And through Red, Charlie made connections in the underground, and he began frequenting brothels and night spots in the city. And legend has it, he became known as Pretty Boy amongst the sex workers. And that was how he picked up the moniker. While gallivanting in one of the brothels, Charlie met his longtime girlfriend, Juanita Baird. She was the wife of one of the pimps there in town. And regardless of her marital status, she and Charles hit it off, and within a flash, they were soon living together and spending lots of time with each other.
Oh, not that name, though.
Juanita.
Juanita Baird?
Mm-hmm.
You said?
That was her name.
Well, it sounds like I need a beard or something. Sorry.
You taking up with the master pimp?
No shit.
Mm-hmm.
That's some balls.
I mean, he's very ballsy. You're going to find out in the story just how ballsy he is. So, life was not easy for Charlie Floyd in Kansas City, though. Because of his criminal record and the company he kept, the police arrested him frequently and would hold him for questioning, quote unquote. But mostly Charlie hadn't done anything wrong. He was minding his own business, but the cops just wouldn't leave him alone. He was hounded by them constantly, and he couldn't so much as breathe, as he would be hauled in for some sort of stupid excuse. But while he was in the throes of dealing with the cops, he got the most devastating news of his life. Charles's father had gotten into a fight with Jim Mills back in Salisaw at Mills General Store. There was a dispute over a pile of lumber that the senior Floyd had paid for. Mr. Floyd pulled a knife on Mr. Mills and stormed out of the store. And believing Mr. Floyd was going for a gun, Mr. Mills followed him out and shot him in the street with a shot-off shotgun, killing him dead in the middle of the street like a dog.
Damn.
Now, Charles and Juanita raced back to Salisaw for his father's funeral and subsequent trial of the man that shot his father down. And at the trial, Jim Mills was acquitted of all charges. Charles Floyd was visibly angry in the courtroom and seethed with anger, but he held his composure. And interestingly enough, Jim Mills disappeared after the trial. He was never seen nor heard from again, and rumor has it that Charles administered some sort of frontier justice to Mr. Mills. But no one could be for sure. And nevertheless, Charles and Juanita returned to Kansas City shortly after Jim Mills disappeared. But fearing more harassment from the cops, Charlie hooked up with an old prison buddy named Jim Bradley. Now, Jim Bradley was a thief and bank robber and murderer and prison escapee. You know, he had a...
yeah. He's just got a great resume there.
Oh, he's got a great resume.
Top of the class.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, did it ever say why the guy Mills got off on shooting his father?
It didn't say. I would assume some sort of self-defense thing.
That would be my thought, because if the father had pulled the knife first, but if the father was leaving, then the threat is gone, so it's no longer self-defense. But
if he's claiming that he thought he was getting a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but if he's walking away,
but he could be saying, "I thought he was going to go get a gun, therefore I went ahead and
But did he have one?
Exactly, because when you get out there and you don't see one. Anyways, sorry.
I mean, he may have. I mean,
tell me to take that path over here. Just
you're totally fine.
No, I wanted to argue that for a hot second too.
Yeah,
it's all good.
Now, so Jim Bradley was a thief, bank robber, and murderer and prison escapee who ran the Bradley gang out of Ohio. The gang consisted of Jim, and it also consisted of Oklahoma City outlaw Jeff King and shoplifter Nellie Maxwell. And this was just the thing.
Girl?
I could never find out.
They wouldn't have a chick in the gang.
Yeah, I'm guessing it was a guy that was named Nellie.
Okay.
That'd be a fair guess, because you also got to think about this time, with Bonnie and Clyde and the Barrow Gang and all this kind of stuff. I mean, Bonnie was really one of the only ones at the time that was running around with the gang. So,
absolutely. And it was just the thing that Charles was looking for. So he left Kansas City, and Jim welcomed Charlie with open arms. And soon the gang was on the road robbing several places in the Toledo, Ohio area. Their first big score came when they robbed the Farmers and Merchants Bank in Sylvania, Ohio. At 1 p.m. on February the 5th, 1930, the gang struck. 5 of the gang members stormed the bank, guns drawn, announcing that it was a stick-up. Floyd was responsible for crowd control, and Jim King was responsible for getting the cash. King dug through numerous cash drawers, grabbing what money he could, and King turned his attention to bank manager John Ifland. He demanded Ifland open the vault, but Ifland, being quick on his feet, activated the time lock on the vault whenever the bandits broke into the front door of the bank. So his hands were tied and he couldn't get the vault open. He was powerless to open it. And this did not sit well with King. King hit him in the head with the butt of his gun, and realizing they couldn't get blood from a turnip, the gang fled with a whopping $2,000 in cash.
That's still a pretty good haul, though. I mean,
yeah, considering.
I'm like, because I'm sitting here thinking, I mean, that's still like close to what, $35,000 or something like that?
Yeah, about $35,000.
I mean, I'm sitting here thinking about the Bonnie and Clyde story about how they'd get away with like $6 from a gas station, you know? I mean,
yeah, because Bonnie and Clyde were going after small fish, it seemed like, compared to what these guys were doing.
Yeah.
So Floyd was back into a life of crime. The life of a working man was not going to be for him ever, and this was the life that he had chosen. A few months later, on March the 8th, Jim Bradley got into trouble. He and King had been out drinking and were driving drunk. They made a left-hand turn and crashed into another car there in the street. A nearby patrol officer saw the whole thing and came over to check on everyone. But a drunk Bradley got out and shot the police officer. Bradley ran away, but King was caught close by, and the arrest of King led the authorities back to the gang's hideout. While searching the place, the authorities found the license plate from the Sylvania job, and they also found an unlucky Floyd in bed with a woman. Having what they needed to tie the gang to the Sylvania bank robbery, the authorities arrested Floyd and all the members of the Bradley gang, and Floyd immediately proclaimed his innocence. But on May the 20th, 1930, he and King were identified by 2 bank employees from Sylvania. So Floyd waited around in jail for sentencing. And on November the 24th, 1930, Floyd and King were sentenced. Both got 12 to 15 years at the infamous Ohio State Prison, the overcrowded hellhole in Columbus. On December the 10th, 1930, Floyd and King were put on a train headed straight to that prison. Charlie wore his finest clothes, which seemed kind of odd to the guards. But Charlie was sending a message. He swore to King that he would die before he did any more time in prison. He had devised a plan to get away. He was getting off this train one way or another, and as the train was moving, he kept asking to go to the bathroom. But his guards kept saying no because they thought he would try to escape. However, Charlie was persistent, and finally the guards relented and took him to the bathroom. After about 10 seconds inside the door, they heard the glass shatter. As the guards finally got the door open, all they saw on the floor was broken glass, and there was no sign of Charles Floyd to be found. Floyd had jumped out the window of a moving train and slunk off into the night away from his captors, only 10 miles from prison. The train screeched to a grinding halt, and the guards responsible for Floyd were not giving up easily. They were going to find him come hell or high water. But Charlie had found a good vantage point and a good place to hide. The guards searched and searched, but they never could find him. And as the guards got back onto the train and it disappeared over the horizon, Charlie got up and decided he would make his way back to Kansas City. There he could disappear and blend back in with the underworld. So he walked the back roads and hitchhiked and rode the rails by night and covered the 700 miles to get back to Kansas City from the middle of Ohio.
Damn. But why would you go back?
Why would you go back? That seems like that would be exactly where they'd be looking for you.
He just could not stay away from Kansas City. Like, he goes back to Kansas City several times in this story. And I guess it's a big enough town. And like I said, the cops and the judges were on the take. So maybe he could hide and people wouldn't really bother him.
Well, and it's probably the environment, the atmosphere, all that stuff. It's very alluring to a single man who doesn't have any,
any prospects, really.
Yeah, exactly. So it's probably very alluring for him.
With nowhere else to go, he went back to somewhere familiar. He went to the Ash boarding house, which was one of his many hangouts from his previous stints in Kansas City. It was a boarding house ran by Juanita's ex-mother-in-law, the mother of Will and Wallace Ash, 2 well-known pimps and gangsters in Kansas City. That had been married to Juanita and her sister Rose. And when Charlie checked in, he instantly reconnected with Juanita, and who else should be staying in the boarding house but an old prison buddy of Charles's named Billy the Killer Miller. Billy had earned his nickname because he killed his own brother over a woman. He was a prison escapee and a seasoned robber by the time he met back up with Charles Floyd. and he and Floyd fell right back in with each other. Both young, dapper, and good-looking, and great at stick-ups, they decided to put their talents to good use. So on March the 9th, 1931, Billy, Charlie, and Juanita took a trip over to Oklahoma. Floyd and Miller robbed the Earlsboro Bank. They held all the customers and employees at gunpoint, eventually forcing them all into the vault and stealing about $3,000.
That sounds like a very bad country song. Billy, Charles, and Juanita going to Earlsboro. Yeah, it sounds like a really bad country song premise. Did you say it was Earlsboro Bank?
Earlsboro, Oklahoma.
Yes. Yeah, I'd have to agree. That's a
yeah.
perfect setting for a great country western song there.
Somebody write that and get back to me.
But I don't say nothing about mamas or trains.
Oh, shut the fuck up, right? or trucks. Or getting drunk.
Or dogs.
Or getting drunk.
Or dogs.
Oh, yeah. So with pockets full of cash, they decided to go back to Kansas City again and celebrate. The trio returned to the Ash boarding house, and Juanita's sister Rose was there waiting on them. She had missed the three and had become real sweet on Billy. And now the two outlaw couples were together and could go out on the town. But all was not well in the Ash house. Juanita and Rose's ex-lover/husbands, Will and Wallace Ash, were pissed. They didn't like the fact that there were two young bank robbers living in their mother's house and taking their girls out on the town. So the jealous Ash brothers tipped off police about Pretty Boy Floyd being at a local speakeasy later on that week. Floyd was there and had rented a private room just for the night. Police raided the joint and nearly took Charles Floyd in. He got away but suspected that the Ash brothers had tipped off the law. He knew they were jealous and had heard rumblings they were out to get him. But nonetheless, about 2 days later, the duo of stool pigeons disappeared. The last anyone heard of them, they were going to Kansas City for a night out. But the brothers never made it. About a mile south of Kansas City, a car forced the Ash's car off the road. The two brothers were forced out of their car and were forced to stand on the edge of a drainage ditch. They were made to turn around with their backs facing the gunman who had gotten them out of the car, and both were shot execution style in the back of the head. Damn. And their car was set ablaze. It's not known if Floyd and Miller committed this crime, but before they could be questioned, Floyd and Miller hit the road with the ex-wives of the Ashes and had gotten the hell out of Dodge. So,
yeah.
They didn't like rats either.
Mm-mm. No, they did not.
Sometimes you got to burn down the barn to get rid of all of them.
Mm-hmm. Now,
Jesus, Shelly, remind me never to piss you off.
Do not cross Shelly.
Ever.
Now, whether or not they committed the murders, Floyd and Miller were back to doing what they were good at. They robbed banks in Kentucky and Ohio and decided to drive to Bowling Green, Ohio. When they got to town, they began spending lavishly, drawing suspicion from the local townsfolk. It was almost as if Charlie had learned nothing from his past, like when he bought the Studebaker.
About to say, dude, come on.
The clerk at the clothing store called the town sheriff, telling him about the suspicious people who had stopped in the store that day and dropped a whole lot of cash. The sheriff thought maybe this was the group that had robbed a bank a few towns over a few days prior. And so on April the 15th, 1931, Sheriff Gallner and City Patrolman Ralph Kastner went downtown to stake out the area. And it wasn't long before they spotted the two strange men leaving the barbershop. And across the street, two strange women rounded the corner with their shopping bags. Sheriff Gallner got out of his car and approached the two couples with his hand on his revolver, and he demanded that they put their hands up. Floyd and Miller turned on a dime and opened fire on the officers. Billy Miller went down instantly, shot dead by Sheriff Gallner. As Miller's gun fell, Juanita reached for it, and Gallner shot her in the head, seriously injuring her, keeping her from grabbing it. Floyd angrily emptied his gun, firing at the officers, hitting Patrolman Kastner and piercing his intestines. Floyd, having spent his weapon, fled from the scene, and Sheriff Gallner gave chase, but Floyd was able to evade his pursuer and hop into his car parked around the corner. Floyd left Bowling Green and his friends in the dust. He had messed up big time. He didn't know it yet, but Patrolman Kastner died of his wounds. The bullets pulled from Kastner matched the gun Floyd had used, and Floyd was now a wanted man. He had committed first-degree murder, and the cops were now after him for killing one of their own.
Man, that's almost exactly about whenever the story turns on Bonnie and Clyde too.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
at that moment.
Whenever you kill a lawman. Yeah,
That's
Yep.
it.
when
Yep,
that's
that's
when
it.
you're pretty much done. They're gonna
Yeah.
find you
Yeah.
no matter what.
They're gonna hunt you to the ends of the earth after you
Mm.
do
That's
that.
right.
I mean, you
Damn,
can rob a
dude.
bank, but
Description of that though, like shit.
Mhm.
Dropped his friend instantly, and then she reached for the gun. And you said he seriously injured her. Like
he
he didn't
seriously
kill
now
her.
she ended up surviving. Juanita and Rose ended up serving a little bit of a prison sentence for this. I think about 3 years. So, or I think it was 3 years, or it was an extended period of time, but they both survived.
Yeah, yeah.
But Billy Miller did not. When he got shot in the neck, and it just instantly killed him.
And there were 2 police officers involved in that
Yeah,
shootout.
it was a
correct?
sheriff and the patrolman. The patrolman died.
The sheriff is the one that had his intestines punctured.
No, the patrolman's the one that
The
has intestines
patrolman
punctured.
did.
Mhm.
Okay, I was like, God, that's got to be awful.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh.
and he died a slow death because like he didn't die instantly. He
Probably died of an infection. More
he
than
did.
likely.
It took a few days, but he ended up dying.
See, and right there's that's the moment. That's where you're
Point
done
of no
for, buddy.
return right
Yeah,
here. That
yeah,
was it.
right there.
Yeah, that is it.
Mm.
Now, news of his crimes began spreading. His name was emblazoned on the front page headlines across the whole Midwest. He was now infamous, and cops were searching for him everywhere. But under every rock they overturned, it yielded nothing. Floyd was a ghost. He was dust in the wind, nowhere to be found. But in all reality, can you guess where he was hiding?
Kansas City.
Yep. He returned to Kansas City and was hiding in plain sight. And he began hiding out at a local speakeasy and gangster hideaway called the Lusco Noto Flower Shop. Now, Floyd had finally found a place to relax. No one would think to look for him here. He could rest his head for a while and take in the nightlife and just kind of be himself and get away from everything. But his peace of mind wouldn't last long because the cops knew that the flower shop was a front, and they were looking to shut it down once and for all. So on July the 20th, 1931, 21 cops and prohibition agents raided the property. Cops found Floyd in a side room on the second floor. He was sitting on the bed as they opened the door. They shined their flashlights on him and saw the gun in his belt. They took his gun. They took the gun from him, but little did they know he had another. Floyd leapt off the bed, firing the gun into the darkness. And in the fray, he hit Prohibition agent Curtis Burke in the abdomen, mortally wounding him. So there's another officer he killed.
Oh, shit. Yep.
And this guy is federal. This is a Prohibition agent.
Yep.
Floyd was able to use the distraction to slip out of the building and into his car and get away once again. Now, Floyd needed to hide, so he returned home to Oklahoma and hid out in the Cookson Hills, just like so many outlaws before him. He had come full circle, but it wasn't long until Floyd was back into the swing of things. He had met up with an old associate named George Birdwell, and the two hit the road, robbing several banks across Oklahoma until early fall 1931. But being back in Oklahoma gave Floyd nostalgia pangs. He really missed his wife and his son, and he wanted to be with them. And he had heard from some friends that his ex-wife Ruby had remarried and moved over the state line over into Coffeyville, Kansas. So he tracked her down and showed up at Ruby and her new husband's doorstep in September of 1931. He begged his ex-wife and son to come with him.
Oh my God.
And he said he wanted to be with them and he wanted to be a real family. But Ruby's new husband did not like or appreciate the fact that Charles Floyd had come to his house. But him being a baker and Charles Floyd being an outlaw, he was no match for Charles Floyd. And Ruby and Jackie left with Charlie anyway.
Wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on, Shelly's got an issue with this.
Mm-hmm.
So this man, you remarried him. He's been taking care of little Jack Dempsey's fighter kid,
Mm-hmm.
and now just because your old man shows back up that you divorced,
Mm-hmm.
you'd be like, "Oh, it's all fine. Let's go."
Oh hell, I guess she loved him. I don't know, but they left. They left the old baker in the dust over in Kansas.
Think it'd be out of love, or do you think it'd be out of fear?
So by all accounts,
I mean, I hate to say that, but
by all accounts, he was always really good to his family. He was always really good to his lovers and his son. And
he has been splashed across the front page of newspapers saying that he killed people. I'd be like, we're good. you want a picture?
I don't know.
Some people like a bad boy. I don't know. But they ended up leaving with him anyway. and they moved to Fort Smith, Arkansas, and settled under the assumed name Hamilton. Now, Charlie told neighbors he was a traveling salesman, and he walked his son to school all the time and took his son on fishing trips and took his son to the movies and spent a few months, just hanging out with his son and hanging out with Ruby and catching up on lost time. He was such a family man that the deputy U.S. Marshal next door never suspected that he was Pretty Boy Floyd.
He lived next to a marshal.
Yes.
That's some fucking balls,
this guy
man.
is ballsy. I did not know that part of the story for sure.
Yes. The guy, he never suspected it.
And tell me again, what year is this now? What year are we talking about?
This is 1930. Sorry.
Okay.
I have to go back.
So the 30s. Okay.
31.
31. So his kid was born in 25. So his kid is 6. And mama thinks it's good. Let's take the kid on a life of crime run with ex-felon daddy who've been shooting lawmen. And let's move in next to a law enforcement officer. And we just go act like everything's good. This woman's got a screw loose.
She might just. She
again, then it was way easier to disappear. I get that. You just roll into town and say, hey, this is our name and we're a nice little family. We're going to settle down. It was way easier.
Oh, yeah.
But his picture's been in the paper.
But think about it. It's on the paper every single day. Like, yeah, when he did it initially, it was in the paper, but it's not like today where your picture splashed all over every available screen or every available media source.
You would have had to have gotten that newspaper and been able to afford to get that newspaper, read that newspaper, and then so the newspaper would not have been readily available to everyone. Okay, no. I'm starting to piece together how they could get away with it. Okay,
you would think a lawman would know.
You would think so, or maybe he was just really bad at his job,
or maybe he hadn't gotten an APB because they weren't.
Could be, because they weren't. Maybe because he hadn't been known to be in the area until up to this point.
Well, and think about it too, and I'll kind of get into this later. At the time, there wasn't really, the FBI was around, but they couldn't really do what the FBI can do now. This is before everything happens with the FBI. So you don't really have a national police force. You can rob somebody in Oklahoma and go to Georgia and be fine.
And nobody ever knows about the crime.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay.
But not one to stay anywhere for long, Floyd moved his family to Tulsa, Oklahoma after about 3 months. It was a brave move for a famous bank robber with a bounty on his head. In his time away from the state, the governor of Oklahoma and bank leaders placed a $2,000 bounty on Floyd. So moving back to Tulsa probably wasn't the best idea. In a further act of hubris, Floyd sat down and wrote the governor of Oklahoma a letter on January the 20th, 1932. A very bold move for a man trying to keep a low profile. In the letter, he said, quote, "Acting Governor Burns, you will either withdraw the reward on me at once or suffer the consequences. No kidding. I have robbed no one but moneyed men." End quote.
Damn, dude. This motherfucker is ballsy.
He don't give a shit.
Nope.
So Floyd was no dummy because he knew the press would eat that letter up. He strategically had painted himself as a modern-day Robin Hood figure, saying he robbed only moneyed men. Because it was the Depression, he knew it would garner sympathy from the public. But while it made him a legend in the press and galvanized him in the eyes of the poor, the bounty remained on his head and the law was on the lookout for Charlie Floyd. The whole time Floyd tried his hand at domestic life, he and Birdwell were still robbing banks. The traveling salesman bit was to cover up for his random and extended absences and substantial income. That February, Floyd and Birdwell were planning another heist when police recognized the two of them sitting in a car. A gun battle ensued and a car chase ensued with the two ditching the car and fleeing on foot. The cops found the car and ran the plates. And the plates ran back to 513 Young Street belonging to a Jack Hamilton, Pretty Boy Floyd's alias. On February the 11th, 1932 at 5 a.m., the officers descended onto the Young Street residence, hoping to catch Oklahoma's most infamous criminal by surprise. The police fired a tear gas canister into the front window, hoping to flush the inhabitants out of the house. But no one came out. When cops went in, there was no one to be found. Earlier in the night, Ruby and Jackie had left and ran to a nearby bus station, and Floyd and Birdwell left silently shortly thereafter and skipped town. The cops looked stupid, and Floyd had slipped from their clutches once again. But all was not lost for the police. Floyd may have escaped, but they found Ruby and Jackie hiding out at the bus station. The police picked them up and took them down to the station, and inside the station was a giant poster of Charles Floyd. Jack noticed it and blurted out, "That's my daddy."
Was it still a good idea to bring the kid?
Oh, man.
He told the police that Charles Floyd and Birdwell had indeed been at the home in Tulsa. But when Ruby was questioned, she remained tight-lipped. She refused to give them anything until she finally admitted that she was the ex-wife of Charles Floyd. She told her interrogators that Floyd hadn't done half of the stuff he was accused of, and one thing was for sure, they were never going to catch him. The cops, frustrated but realizing they weren't getting anywhere with her and weren't going to get blood out of her turnip again, let her go and let Jackie go. But they let her know that she was being watched, and she and Jackie went back to living at the Young Street residence. Now, finally, on April the 8th, 1932, Ruby and Jackie left to go visit Ruby's family in Bixby, Oklahoma. The law followed and suspected that she may meet Charles Floyd out there. So they assigned former McIntosh County Sheriff Irv Kelly to stake out the property and wait for Floyd. Irv Kelly had a reputation for bringing bank robbers and murderers to justice, so they put him on the case. And when Ruby got to family friend Cecil Burnett's farm, she parked her car, and not knowing that Kelly was close by and had been tailing her. Kelly had gathered a posse of lawmen from the nearby town, and as they watched the farm like hawks, hoping Floyd would show up. But it was cold that night, and the posse had gotten cold, so Kelly told them to go back into town and get some coffee while he stayed and watched the road. As they left, Kelly loaded up his Tommy gun and hid behind a chicken coop, staking out the street. Shortly after midnight, a car approached the farm. Kelly saw the two men in the front seat matching the description of Floyd and Birdwell. So he jumped out from behind the chicken coop, confronting the two men in the car. But Kelly wasn't very familiar with his Tommy gun and how it worked. Kelly squeezed the trigger and nothing happened. Floyd saw Kelly standing in the road with the Tommy gun, just like in the middle of the road like this, squeezing the trigger. So he jumps out of the car and opened fire on the bumbling officer. Kelly figured out his machine gun just then and returned fire, hitting Floyd in the foot and the ankle. Floyd screamed in pain and filled Kelly full of lead. Using his .45 revolver, he shot Kelly in both knees, right arm, and left side twice, ending Kelly's life on the spot. Birdwell acted fast and loaded Floyd up in the car. Birdwell stepped on the gas and hightailed it to Floyd Brothers' farm in Earlsboro, where they paid a local doctor to treat Floyd's wounds and to keep his freaking mouth shut. Charlie had almost taken a dirt nap, and it was pure luck that he was still alive.
So he was shot in the foot and in the
ankle.
In the ankle. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And the officer was shot in both knees, right arm and left side twice.
Yep.
Killing him on the spot.
Yeah, killing him instantly.
Damn.
So that's three. That's
I was
three
gonna
cops.
say we're up to three at this point.
We're up to three law enforcement
law
officers.
enforcement body count is growing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, this is the sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, you're fine, man.
This is the point, and just reading a lot of the outlaw stories, and like I said, I didn't know this one as much in detail as some of the other ones. I mean, this is the point where they just lose it all mentally, is what I'm saying. Like they get to that point where they're like, "Fuck it, I've killed law before. I don't give a shit." Like going out in a hell of bullets.
Well, whatever. They're tired too.
They're
Think about like they're operating.
They're gonna go down before
they're
me.
They're paranoid. They don't know who's friend, who's foe. They're gonna do whatever they can to survive. That survival instinct kicks in at that point.
But
and at the same time, you have the officers same time going, "We don't give a shit. We're gonna kill them when we see them." Just that's a prime example. The officer jumps out with a Tommy gun. Doesn't take the safety off or do whatever it is. Forgot to.
He didn't know what the hell to do with it.
Didn't bother to learn how to use it. Jumps out with him. He's gonna fill that car full of lead.
This fucking man should have either had his life ended by this point in this story or have been arrested and in jail at this point. How many times now?
Several.
I mean, this son of a bitch is
like 3 different times already.
And trust me, when I tell you I scaled it down, there were so many banks I lost track of.
Oh,
there were so many banks and so many gunfights. I had to scale it down. And he was actually known, I didn't put it in the notes, but he was known as the Ghost of the Ozarks or the Phantom of the Ozarks for how many times he was able to get away.
Yeah.
So
crazy.
Yeah, he was damn near an escape artist, because there were so many times he should have been caught or should have been killed, but he just wasn't.
Right.
Now, Floyd remained inactive that summer, healing from his gunshot wounds and spending time with family there in Earlsboro and around Sallisaw. But Floyd's itch to get back out there and rob a few banks was all too great. So on November the 1st, Floyd and Birdwell rolled into Sallisaw, and Floyd decided it would be a good idea to rob the bank of his hometown. Right before he committed the crime, he walked into several shops and the barbershop in town, and he told his friends and neighbors what he was going to do, all the while joking and laughing with the patrons and shop owners. And he asked them to stay away from their phones and to not call it in. So Floyd and Birdwell walked across the street and into the bank and robbed the Sallisaw Bank, while Floyd's grandfather watched. The two men took about $3,000 from the bank and left town in a flash. That is brazen, to go back to your hometown and rob the bank.
And tell everybody, hey, I'm going to rob this bank.
Yeah.
Y'all zip it.
Yeah.
Y'all don't know shit.
It's like, shut up.
And you got PayPal over there watching?
Yeah. And
PayPal.
His pawpaw actually said he was surprised at how, and was pretty proud about it when he was interviewed later on. It was like at how fast they were able to rob the bank and get out of town.
PayPal's like, that's my boy. What? Get out of here with that.
Oh my God.
I mean, you think about it too. I mean, these are farmers in the Depression, and they see the bank with all the money, and they don't have anything. So
you know what I said? My lips are sealed. Where's my cut?
I mean, he may have gotten some. You never know.
PayPal might have gotten him. Yeah. PayPal might have got him a new plow or something, new mule.
He could have. You never know. New set of false teeth.
There you go.
I was thinking like a new
a
new spittoon or something.
There you go.
It's like, keep your mouth shut, Pawpaw. There's a spittoon in it for you.
There you go. That's right.
So shortly after the Sallisaw robbery, Birdwell and Floyd talked about robbing the bank in Boley, Oklahoma. But ultimately, Floyd decided against it. However, Birdwell thought it was a good idea to rob it anyway. So he decided he was going to do it without Floyd. But without the dapper and charming Floyd smoothing things over, things went south really fast. For his trouble, Birdwell would die in the streets of Boley from a shotgun blast after the bank's bookkeeper blew him into oblivion. Floyd couldn't understand why Birdwell would do such a stupid thing. And now he was down a friend and a partner. So he laid low until May of the next year, until he recruited seasoned bank robber Adam Rachetti. And he was back to robbing banks in no time.
I like how you just gloss over that last robbery.
That they blew him away. I'm like,
blew him away. Just
boom. Yeah, they did. They killed him.
It wasn't Pretty Boy that got blown away, so you're gonna gloss over that.
Mm-hmm.
It was
Birdwell.
Partner's gone. That's the important part.
Yeah.
So he actually got shot because the bank president, that was the bank bookkeeper, was hiding in the vault and had the vault open just slightly enough to where he was able to shoot him from the vault and kill him.
Oh shit!
Mm-hmm.
No shit. So that makes how many partners of his now? 2? We're up to 2?
Or 2 that have died.
2?
2, yeah, 2 that died because Killer Miller's dead. Well, you know what? The guy from Ohio, I can't think of his name. He's in prison, and I think he ended up dying in the electric chair. So he dies in the electric chair.
And then you got this one that's been
blown away. You got Birdwell, who's just been blown away. So they go back to robbing banks, but on June 16th, 1933, the car's pair breaks down outside of Bolivar, Missouri. Luckily, they were able to get a tow into town to Adam Rachetti's brother's garage and get it fixed. As Adam's brother tinkered with the car, Charles Floyd and Adam Rachetti chatted with the local townspeople. But by a stroke of bad luck, Sheriff Jack Killingsworth decided to walk into the garage. Rachetti knew who he was and pulled a gun on the unsuspecting lawman. Floyd was annoyed at Rachetti for being so reckless, but there was no turning back now. So the pair forced the sheriff into his car, and they all flew out of town in a flash. Further down the road, they had Sheriff Killingsworth flag down another car, and they jumped into that car, owned by Walter Griffin, and drove straight into Kansas City with 2 hostages at breakneck speed. When they got there, they got out of the car and told Griffith and Killingsworth to drive back to Bolivar. So Griffith and Killingsworth did as they were told, and Floyd and Rachetti disappeared into the night. And when Griffith and Killingsworth got back to Bolivar, they gave their accounts to the local newspaper about their time with Adam Rachetti and Pretty Boy Floyd. This placed Floyd and Rachetti in Kansas City the day before a gruesome massacre, one that would change American law enforcement forever and immortalize Pretty Boy Floyd. Little did Charles Floyd know, his fate was on a collision course with the notorious gangster Frank Nash. Nash was a notorious safecracker and bank robber. He ran with the Barker gang and was a prison escapee who ran to Chicago and got involved with various criminal activities. But on June the 16th, 1933, his criminal past caught up with him. He was vacationing in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and holding court at a mob-owned cigar shop when suddenly he found himself surrounded by FBI agents. As he left the shop, he was approached by Agent Frank Smith, Agent Joe Lackey, and McAllister, Oklahoma Police Chief Otto Reed. The men forced him into a car and hurried him out of Hot Springs. Frank Nash was going back to prison, and he was going straight to Leavenworth. But the agents knew they had to get Frank Nash out of Hot Springs and fast. Word of the arrest would travel, and there would be targets on their backs. So they put him on a train to Kansas City, where the plan was to meet agents and transfer Nash to a car and drive straight to Leavenworth. As the train pulled into Kansas City the next morning, the agents met their reinforcements. A group of 7 lawmen escorted Nash quickly through the station. They made it to the car where Lackey, Smith, and Reed got into the back seat. Frank Nash got into the front. Suddenly, someone shouted at the lawmen, and all hell broke loose. 3 men opened fire with Tommy guns and sawed-off shotguns on the Kansas City police and the FBI agents. Kansas City police officer Bill Grooms returned fire, but was immediately cut down by machine gun fire. Officer Frank Hermanson was also hit. He was having half of his head blown off by a shotgun blast. Agent Ray Caffrey tried to get in the car and take the wheel and get them the hell out of there, but he soon took a slug in the right side of the temple and died. The assassins continued their attack. They sprayed the car containing Nash with bullets. Nash shouted, "For God's sakes, don't kill me," but caught a bullet right in the middle of the forehead. Lackey dropped to the floor and caught 2 machine gun bullets in the spine and was never the same again. Smith had dropped down as soon as the firing began and came out unharmed. But Chief Otto Reed was not so lucky. He caught several bullets and died instantly. The assassins jumped in their car and burned rubber. The agenda had been to free Frank Nash, but it was botched. They killed the very man they were trying to set free. Because of Floyd being in Kansas City that day, authorities and newspapers began immediately speculating on Floyd's involvement. After all, he was the most infamous criminal in Kansas City. So the papers began linking Floyd to the massacre instantly and sensationalizing the senseless act. Although it was not something Floyd was necessarily known to do. Floyd was only known to shoot when cornered. He had never intentionally gone on the offensive. He was brazen, but even this was too much for him. Many wondered if he was even capable of such an act, but it seemed like the authorities and papers were all too happy to pin it on him. While the public and press were making up their minds, authorities began questioning witnesses about who the gunmen were that day. A salesman at the station that day picked out 2 men from a lineup. These 2 men were friends and associates of Nash. One was Mad Dog Wilbur Underhill, and the other one was Harvey Bailey. Both were known to be particularly vicious figures in the underworld. Another witness said they thought that one of the gunmen was well-known criminal Vern Miller. But what put the icing on the cake was the account of Landy West. She described one of the men that she saw that day. The man she described was much bigger than Charles Floyd. But when she saw a picture of Floyd, she said that that was the man that she saw, and the media picked up on her story and absolutely ran with it. As far as the papers and the FBI were concerned, Floyd was involved in the crime. Charles Floyd was quick to deny any involvement in the Kansas City massacre. He was desperate to let anyone know that it wasn't him. So much so that he sent a postcard to the Kansas City Police Department on June the 21st, 1923 that read, "Dear Sirs, I, Charles Floyd, want it made known that I didn't participate in the massacre of officers at Kansas City." The postcard was marked Springfield, Missouri, but Floyd and Ricchetti had actually gone much further than that. Normally, he would have fled back to the Cookson Hills, but now it was way too risky. So he and Ricchetti drifted around the Midwest for a while until they decided to go to Buffalo, New York. It was far enough away from Kansas City, and no one would ever think to look for them out there. So in September of 1933, he and Ricchetti rented apartments under assumed names and laid low. While Floyd and Ricchetti were hiding out in New York, the FBI wasted no time. The FBI had been outgunned by outlaws and gangsters. Before the massacre, the agents were only allowed to carry revolvers and assist police in arrests. But since the massacre, they realized they were dealing with a new class of criminal. So they began to arm themselves with Tommy guns, rifles, and Browning automatic rifles. And with the passage of the Fugitive Felon Act in May of 1934, which made crossing state lines to avoid prosecution of felony, the handcuffs were now off for the FBI. It was now up to the FBI to restore some order, and it was their job to rein in the criminals running rampant in America. The days of the gangsters were numbered, and soon, one by one, these larger-than-life threats to the moral fabric of American society began to fall.
Mm-hmm.
As they did, Charles Floyd's stock began to rise on their list. They hadn't forgotten about Kansas City, and they damn sure hadn't forgotten about Charles Floyd. And in July of 1934, star FBI agent Melvin Purvis took out John Dillinger, a man much like Floyd who robbed banks and had a Robin Hood type image. He had been public enemy number one and was tracked down after a massive manhunt. His life ended in a Chicago alley after Purvis gunned him down. And now that Dillinger was out of the way, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover set his sights on Floyd. He raised Floyd's status to public enemy number one and sent the man that gunned down John Dillinger to complete the job and bring Pretty Boy Floyd to justice by any means necessary. To justify the new drastic move, the FBI announced that had solved the case of the Kansas City massacre. They determined that Vern Miller, Pretty Boy Floyd, and Adam Rachetti had been the perpetrators of the massacre. Floyd was a dangerous man that needed to be brought to justice, and the FBI would bring the outlaw to an end if they had to. Now, Floyd got news of this in Buffalo and knew that he and Adam were doomed. The FBI would stop at nothing until they were captured or dead, and Floyd decided the only way to get away from the FBI was to go international. His plan was to drive south back to the Oklahoma hills and buy a few saddle horses. There, he would ride the horses down to Mexico and the FBI would be none the wiser. But he needed to get there. So he and Rachetti gave money to their girlfriends and told them to go downtown with aliases and buy a brand new V8 Ford. And so on October the 18th, 1934, they went and bought the brand new Ford, and the Ford hit the road, headed for the Oklahoma hills. They hugged the shores of Lake Erie before heading south through Ohio. But on a foggy back road near Wellsville, Ohio, Floyd swerved off the road and hit a telephone pole. The car was too damaged to drive. So he had the two women go into town and get a tow truck, while he and Rachetti waited for them to come back with the car. They unloaded their Tommy guns and their blankets from the car and camped out on a hillside close to the road, waiting for the women to return. Later that morning, Floyd and Rachetti were spotted by a farmer out picking pears. The farmer was suspicious of the two men hanging out in the woods. They were out in the woods, but they were dressed to the nines. So the farmer contacted local police chief John Fultz. Chief Fultz received the call and immediately was suspicious as well. A bank had been robbed in the area the day before, and Fultz thought that these could be the perpetrators. So he and two deputies went out there where the two men were spotted, but they didn't go in police clothes. They went in plain clothing so the two men wouldn't suspect that they were cops. As they began walking towards the campsite, Floyd spotted them. Floyd jumped out from behind a bush, from absolutely out of nowhere, holding a .45. He told the men to put their hands up, but Fultz pretended that they were just a couple of guys walking to work. He told Floyd they didn't mean any harm and they were just passing through. Floyd, not entirely convinced of their story, watched them closely as they continued on their way. And Floyd called out to Rachetti that Fultz and the two men were cops and told Rachetti to shoot him. Rachetti fired at Fultz, but Fultz pulled out his .32 and returned fire. Rachetti ran through the woods to get away from the lawman, and Fultz gave chase, catching up with Rachetti as he was trying to break into a nearby farmhouse. Fultz shot the door just above Rachetti's right shoulder to scare the criminal, and Rachetti screamed, "I give up, for God's sakes, don't kill me." Meanwhile, Floyd was dealing with the two deputies. He pulled back one of the blankets at the campsite to reveal a Tommy gun. He picked it up and fired it at the two deputies, but the deputies took off running, not wanting to fight the bank robber. Floyd used the opportunity to run into the woods and escape once more. Now, Fultz took Rachetti down to the police station. He had no idea who he had captured, but soon found out when he looked in a book of wanted men at the station. Fultz couldn't believe it. He had caught Adam Rachetti and had him in custody. He contacted the FBI, and Melvin Purvis came to town immediately. Melvin was so close to catching Charles Floyd that he could taste it. Purvis ordered roadblocks throughout the area, and the net was closing in on the Oklahoma outlaw. Floyd had nowhere to go. The area was crawling with law enforcement, and every road out of town was blocked. He had escaped so many times, but the walls were closing in. Floyd stuck to the woods, but eventually got hungry, and he emerged from the woods when he happened upon Ellen Conkle's home. She had come outside to clean her smokehouse when Floyd came out of the trees and asked Ellen if he could pay her for some food. He told her that he and his brother had been squirrel hunting, but he had gotten lost. Ellen knew that this was a blatant lie because of how nice his clothes were and how how he was dressed and how nicely coiffed his hair was. But she agreed to give him some food. She made him a nice lunch, and he thanked her for her kindness, and much to her protest, gave her $1 for her generosity. As he was sitting there, Floyd saw a car sitting in the driveway and asked who it belonged to. Ellen said it was her brother's car. Floyd asked if he could get a ride to town from her brother, and her brother Stuart came in from the field and agreed to take Floyd to town. Floyd didn't know it yet, but earlier in the day he had made a fatal mistake. Just down the road from Ellen Conkle's house, he approached a farmer. Floyd paid a farmer for a sandwich and asked for a ride to town. The farmer refused and told him to leave. Floyd left and made his way down to Ellen's. And in the time that Floyd was at Ellen's, the farmer called the police and told them of the well-dressed stranger that had come out of the woods. That information got directly to Melvin Purvis, who began combing the area for Floyd instantly. Floyd and Stuart Conkle got into Conkle's car. But as they did, Floyd noticed 2 sedans coming down the long driveway. Floyd told Stuart to drive behind the corn crib next to the house. He was panicking, and about that time, Stuart put 2 and 2 together and recognized who his passenger was. Stuart looked at Floyd and yelled, "Get out of here, you son of a bitch!" And Floyd's goose was cooked. This was the end of the line. Floyd got out of the car and ran behind the corn crib. The sedans full of FBI agents grinded to a halt. As the doors opened, Floyd made a break for it. If he could just make it to the woods, he could lose them. He could hide and eventually steal a car and make it back to his son and ex-wife and get down to Mexico and live out the rest of his life. But it was not to be. As he ran, Melvin Purvis ordered him to halt. But Floyd kept running. Purvis yelled at him again to stop. Purvis had warned him, and he had told him twice he needed to stop. The third time, Purvis commanded the lawmen to fire on Floyd. As they opened up on Floyd, guns ablazing, Floyd was hit 4 times. 2 bullets nicking his heart and 1 taking part of his lung. He fell face down in the field, but as the lawman approached, he turned over and tried to fire with him at his gun that he had at his side. Purvis was the first to reach him and kick the gun out of his hand. Purvis asked him if he was Pretty Boy Floyd. Floyd answered, "I am Floyd, all right. You got me." Shortly after this, at 4:25 p.m. on October the 22nd, 1934, Floyd died of his wounds in the field. He was only 30 years old.
Damn.
His short, harrowing life had come to a bloody and violent end. To many, he was a no-good scoundrel, but to some, he was a Robin Hood figure, taking money from the greedy banks and helping out the poor man. But no matter what you think of Charles Floyd, he lives forever as a legend in the same company as his hero, Jesse James.
Damn, dude. Let me tell you something. The law was not playing in 1934
No.
because you had Bonnie and Clyde died in May of 1934. Then you had Dillinger, and then you had Pretty Boy Floyd.
And then shortly thereafter, you had Babyface Nelson get got too.
I mean, they were basically like, you know what? Screw these outlaws. Like, we're done with them. But it's like we've been saying this whole episode. I mean, they were law killers, you know?
Yeah.
Well, and now Purvis has a little bit of he got a little shade hanging over him because when he met with Dillinger in that alley, what exactly happened is not real clear.
Right.
But he was how far, Ryan, you might know this, how far of a predecessor was he to Elliot Ness? Because Elliot Ness became the big deal after Purvis. Ness wasn't too far behind, like 15, 20 years.
I think, Ness was, because Ness is the one.
Was Ness in the 50s?
No, he was in the 30s too, I believe. Because he was,
okay.
And I think
he was after Capone.
Yeah, because he was in the 30s. So he was in the 30s. Like, I don't know when he became like the big agent. I think was he in the FBI? He might have been in a different agency. I can't remember, but I'm gonna have to. He's another one I want to cover. And I want to cover Melvin Purvis too.
Purvis was the number one guy for tracking down these notorious bank robbers.
Mm-hmm.
And Ness was more on the prohibition side, where he was going after gangsters, gangsters proper in bigger cities.
Yeah.
So but Purvis had no problem going down, getting in the dirt, finding them, and shooting them.
He was a South Carolina boy. He didn't care,
like the dogs they were. That's right. So but Pretty Boy Floyd, man. Yeah, I didn't know a lot of his story. I knew about him, shooting the lawman and everything, and that's kind of where he makes his fatal flaw, his point of no return.
Yeah.
But
I'm gonna commend you. Like, I mean, that was like that was an amazing story.
Oh,
like,
thanks, man.
You weave that together very well. Coming from somebody who didn't know the whole story, like I said, like Shelley just said, we knew of it, but not into great detail as you had kind of put it out there for us. But I mean, dude, like, it amazes me when we start reading into all these outlaws, just how the parallels start to line up between each one of the stories, between Bonnie and Clyde, between Dillinger, between Babyface and Pretty Boy Floyd. Like, everything's so similar from start of how, like, when they were born, product of their time. Let's be honest, a lot of these people were products of their time. They lived through the Great Depression. They didn't know where money was going to come from, and things like that. And so that's why they turned to a life of crime. And then as you progress, it just gets worse and worse and more heinous. And then they're all killed in a hell of bullets.
Now, something interesting that I did find is there is a robbery, and I can't remember which robbery it was. I cut it for time because it wasn't pertinent to the story, really. It's kind of more of a rumor. It was never substantiated, but I think there was a robbery somewhere in the Midwest that they believe Pretty Boy Floyd and John Dillinger pulled together. There was also, in the book I was reading, it said that Floyd, I think, had met Clyde Barrow once or twice and did not like Clyde Barrow.
I think that you're right, because when I covered Bonnie and Clyde back on whatever episode that was, 17, 18, somewhere in there, that was something that I had stumbled across, that they had crossed paths, but the two couldn't see eye to eye.
I mean, you had all these different personalities that clash really like I said, I think that Dillinger and Floyd are the most similar because they kind of have similar MOs. They have that Robin Hood, treating other people well. The laws the people were after the banks, not after the common man. But, you had Clyde Barrow who had a screw loose. You had Babyface Nelson who had a screw loose. Like, these guys would kill you just as soon as they would look at you,
Yep.
And it's just kind of interesting to think about. And the Barker gang too, which is something else we'll cover at some point.
Oh God, get old Ma Barker.
Oh, Ma Barker, yeah.
That woman was a nut.
She was a trip, and Alvin Creepy Carpus and all those guys. Like, you had all these people running around at the same time, and the FBI could do nothing until they passed that act in 1934. Their hands were tied. You had all these like you were saying. They were completely outgunned. Completely, they couldn't compete with somebody wielding a Tommy gun or a Browning automatic rifle. For some context, whenever these gangsters were getting these types of weapons, they weren't robbing police precincts. They were robbing armories in town and getting these weapons. The army had this shit.
Yeah.
So before that act and before, Melvin Purvis, they were just they couldn't do anything. So that whole series and that whole time period is so interesting. I mean, because even while this is going on, you've even got the gangsters like Capone in Chicago. You've got, you've got Luciano in New York. You've got all this going on at the same time. And just this time period, because they outlawed alcohol and because the Depression hit, it was just a perfect storm for all of this to happen. And you had just a massive crime wave and just gallons of blood spilled because these people had nothing else.
I'm gonna actually tell you, if you ever get a chance when you're in Savannah, Georgia, to go to their Prohibition Museum, that museum there explains all of this, how it set them up to become these outlaws that they were. Because they have a whole room that's dedicated to all of these outlaws that we've been mentioning, including Pretty Boy Floyd. But it's fascinating just to see how one decision to do away with alcohol caused all of this. And they walk you through the timeline of prohibition timeline of it being banned and all the way through the outlaws and everything with the mob and everything. It is absolutely fascinating to finally figure out how it all connects together like that. Makes you wonder would it have happened.
Anytime you tell somebody they can't have something, someone will come in to fill that niche of, oh, yes, you can, and I can get it for you.
Yeah.
And that's how those gangsters got rich.
Yep.
Now, I will tell you something I found interesting about Pretty Boy Floyd is that he actually walked away from it. Most of these gangsters and outlaws, they don't walk away from the lifestyle for any given time. Maybe long enough to heal or long enough to lay low till the heat comes on. This man actually walked away and was living under the name of Hamilton next to a deputy, law enforcement official. He was, for all intents and purposes, kind of out. He didn't want to go and work. So I'm going to go over here and rob people.
And I think that he wanted to go straight. I think that he, there were times where, because he flirted with it throughout his whole criminal career. Like he wanted to be a normal person but he had that restlessness in him that just overtook everything. And he just knew he didn't want to farm.
Junkie.
Yeah.
Adrenaline junkie. Yeah. And that's what it comes down to. And he was so brazen. He was writing the governor. He was writing the law enforcement. He kept going back to his known haunts, going back. Living next door to that's the one that threw me. I did not know that he lived next to that is some balls.
That's some balls.
That is
right in the governor or the mayor or whichever one it was.
The governor and that takes a lot of cojones to sit back there and go, you know what? I'm just this good. And he has this what's that called? This swagger. This
he does.
ability, and it may be because he is pretty boy Floyd. He has the charisma. He's a good-looking man. He was probably very charming. He was probably able to talk his way out of so many situations, and that's probably what helped him.
Now,
that adrenaline. Whew.
What do y'all think? Do y'all think that he was involved in the Kansas City massacre or no?
I don't think so. He took a minute to write a letter. I don't think he had a problem claiming anything he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I whenever you were talking about that, I started thinking, I was like, wow, I think that they were looking for a reason to elevate him.
I agree.
To a higher wanted level. I don't know. I don't think he was.
I think that it was Ma Barker's gang because they were trying to get Nash, who was a member of Barker's gang. I think it was Ma Barker's boys.
Well, that's another theory too, that it was actually a mob hit because they were afraid that Nash was going to talk. And so because actually the Barkers were dealing, they had kidnapped the son of the ham brewer, like ham brewing back up in Milwaukee. They had kidnapped him at this point. They were busy doing that. So they were like off doing their own thing. But there were other mob figures that they think may have called in the hit on Nash because and not even rescue him in the first place.
Yeah. He was a safecracker.
Because they thought he would talk, he was going back to Leavenworth. He was going to big prison and he was going to talk to the feds. So,
well, and he worked with several different organized crime figures.
Yeah.
So he knew where a lot of bodies were buried. So maybe they thought they had to get rid of him.
I will say, out of all the comments that our viewers are throwing in here, that we've now had 2 that have mentioned that their grandfathers were involved with hunting down Bonnie and Clyde, and one of them has said somewhere down the line that's Nick Sarlo. Someone down the line we're related somehow to Babyface Nelson.
Oh, that's awesome.
All this is kind of cool that y'all are so involved in the stories like this because everybody kind of has a connection. I mean, I've told you all my connection with the whole Bonnie and Clyde thing, that allegedly my great-grandparents skated with them at a skating rink here in East Texas. I don't know if
and I'm a cousin to Jesse James.
Yeah. So I find all these stories fascinating. Go ahead.
They say, hell, I don't know what I am.
We don't know either. We're still trying to figure it out, man.
Yeah, Blake tried to look you up, right?
Yeah, the genealogist over here.
I couldn't find shit. No. Couldn't find shit.
Yes, my grandparents were both of them. All their families are from Missouri, and it's on my grandfather's side is one of his grandfather's sisters is
Jesse James is my uncle. That was from Morgan.
Morgan, we're related.
Awesome. That's awesome.
That's pretty damn cool.
And speaking of Jesse James, like how crazy, like the parallels between those two too, just, he idolized him and ended up just like him. I mean, man, but going back to the Kansas City massacre, I don't think he was involved either. I think that he has, what reason it didn't match his MO. Like, what reason does he have to do it? Like, he was just there to party and hang out in Kansas City. Like, why would he go on a hit and kill a gangster and not get anything else out of it? So,
well, I mean, why would he go and mess with the pimp's wife and been like, yeah, we good? I'll leave the money on the table.
That's another ballsy move.
This guy, you gotta admire that.
Mm-hmm.
He had some balls. I will, I'll give him that.
And these larger than life characters, like you read all these stories about them, and like they're embellished in like these dime store novels, and I mean, sometimes you just go look at their story. There is no need for embellishment. They're just that brazen and that outlandish and that crazy. So I had a good time researching this one, and I can't wait to get into some more gangsters because I'm going to.
Oh God, yeah. We know you are. Ryan's all about all the gangsters and outlaws.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, Blake, I'm gonna throw it to you, buddy.
You want me to tell them everything they need to know?
Yes.
Cool. Sounds good. First off, I want to give a huge shout out because I've been seeing nothing but the videos, the pictures, all of that stuff to some of our past guests and their event they had this past Saturday. Nick Sarlo, hashtag sexy like Sarlo, and Bill Walter, Sir Sexy.
Sir Sexy.
We are so glad y'all had a fantastic turnout for Spirits of the Spring. Congratulations on that. It looks like it was so much fun. We cannot wait to go next year because we hear through the grapevine on Facebook there is going to be another year of it. So y'all be watching out for that. It was a really good turnout. On top of that, May 12th through the 13th, we're going to be speaking at West Tech's Paracon in Ballinger, Texas. They are going to have over 10 speakers, including John Zaffis, Natalie Jones, us, the Kling Brothers, as well as many others. We're also going to be doing a special screening of the ScareNetwork.tv original documentary Old Park that we were featured in, which is one of the craziest weekends we've had at the Old Park Hotel.
If you want to see me catch and chase ghosts, that's the one to come watch.
That's the one to come watch.
Yep, it's in
exactly. Yep. And at night on that weekend, they're going to be hosting investigations at the Old Park Hotel and the Old Reynolds County Jail on both of those nights. And if that's not enough, July 14th through the 16th, you can catch us in Kansas City, Missouri. We are going to be speaking at Metacon, where I hear they are going to have John Zaffis will be there as well. They're also going to have Travis Walton, Story of Fire in the Sky, if y'all have never heard that.
Child, my alien. I was like,
yeah, we were all talking about. I was like, I'm gonna go.
I'm going.
And they're also going to have, they're also going to have Andrea Perrin as well with the Conjuring House.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yep. And they're going to have a bunch of different metaphysical speakers as well as 40 plus vendors and over 30,000 square feet of shopping, fun, and healing. And our tickets for another two-night investigation at Old Park Hotel is on sale currently. We are over half sold out on that. There are only 4 slots left available. If you want tickets to that is October 6th and 7th. We are going to be opening up the Old Reynolds County Jail across the street for that one. So same price as the one if you went in April. You're just going to be getting 2 buildings for the price of 1 at that one. So we'll make sure we get links posted and all that stuff. Also, make sure you're following us across all social channels to stay up to date on all the exclusive content we have coming this year. We utilize the different channels to promote different content. So if you're only getting on one channel, you're only getting a fraction of the content available. Find the link link in the description of the episodes or the About Me or Bio sections on our pages. You can be taken directly where you want to go, including all of our social media channels, our public investigations, as well as our Patreon channel, which for just $5 a month, you get just under 100 additional Patreon exclusive videos, including our pre and post broadcasts, which are stupid. I love them. They're fucking stupid.
Please don't judge us based on those.
Our Paracon speaking events, first dibs of public event tickets, and up-to-date information on date, times, and locations. So where we'll be and what we'll be doing. Trust me, we reveal everything on Patreon.
Yeah, figure out who'd rather scoot their butt across the carpet than wipe it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody on this screen.
As always, if you have any questions, comments, or stories you'd like to share, those can be submitted to us at the evppod@gmail.com. That's THEEVPPOD@gmail.com.
Like, share, and subscribe.
So, after Blake said that mouthful,
for my I got it down now, Smith, buddy.
I know, man. I mean, good Lord, that whole spiel is like 2 pages long. So, for my friends Blake Smith and my friend Shelley Pruitt, I'm Ryan Roberts. This is Everything Vaguely Paranormal. We will see you next